Welcome! Are you wondering why your child has such a hard time focusing or their behavior has no answers? Maybe your pain continues even though you've tried everything. Or why the exercises and stretches you do don't really help with the coordination or balance. Our bodies are so complex. Whether it's behavior, pain, balance, or ease of movement, there is something hidden in plain sight that relates to all of these. Overlooked by both traditional and alternative wellness professionals, it's the movements within the body. In this video, I'll be explaining how movement relates to so many of these challenges in life, the concept of a micromovement, and the 4 ways micromovements can be messed up. The best part is that this micromovement framework allows us to create a roadmap for getting our life back. I'm Kara Lindell, and I developed this micromovement framework used in the bridging technique, which I teach to other professionals. One question I get asked a lot is, how did I come up with this technique? Using my unique perspective from years of being a systems engineer and an exercise specialist, I was able to see the body's function in a new way. There's a quote from Henry David Thoreau: "It's not what you look at, it's what you see." One thing engineers are trained to do is ask questions. It's called root cause analysis. Was a challenge to movement a matter of trying harder and practicing more? Maybe it just doesn't work. So with movement, I found assuming that we all have a perfectly functioning body is actually not a good assumption. There's specific ways that the parts of the body need to flow and interact so that we function without even thinking about it. And these are what I'll refer to as the micromovements, the building blocks of living. So what are micromovements? Well, just like programmers use digital code blocks to create the complexity of the apps that we use on our mobile devices and computers, our bodies create movement code blocks, and these are used to support all the complexities of life, from breathing and calming to communication and movement. The micromovements have an organization to them. They begin to be assembled before we're born, and they continue until we're done growing. And when you experience challenging behaviors, pain, and awkwardness, these micromovement blocks, they aren't working well. Once you learn to recognize the micromovement code, it opens up a new world of understanding of how our bodies are supposed to move. It also provides a roadmap for change. As I worked with children over the years, I discovered they had common yet really specific aspects of movement which just didn't work. And when I was able to get the movements to work, everything changed. Movement, behavior, social skills, and learning. Even more amazing is when I started looking for these same specific movements with adults having pain or coordination challenges, their micromovements were messed up too. And just like the kids, when the movements changed, the pain went away, coordination got better, and anxiety turned into a sense of calm. What I consistently found was that these micromovements are critical for our well-being at every age. The good news is the bridging technique specifically and quickly reprograms these micromovements, allowing your body to function better. And that's the magic. In the rest of this video, I'm going to take you through the 4 common reasons why the micromovement code blocks may be messed up. There's 4 common reasons that the micromovements may not work well at any age: injuries and accidents, medical interventions, birth events, and believe it or not, prenatal development. For an adult, uncovering the issues with these micromovements can be the solution to pain. For a child, the compromised micromovements are often the insight to behavior and learning struggles. So let's unpack these 4 reasons. Well, first, our injuries and accidents. That's pretty straightforward. We get injured in so many ways, mostly by falling or accidents with things that move, like bikes and cars. Sometimes we get bounced around by others when we're playing sports. Yeah, it stings, you shake it off, and after a while it seems okay. But in reality, the trauma actually messes up the way the core, arms, and legs, and head, while those micromovements work together. Unless you specifically check for these micromovements, you won't find the effect. It's an aspect that won't get checked at the ER, but it can be just as significant. Second are medical interventions. There's so many medical procedures that keep us going, and they're often life-saving, but what gets lost in the miracle is the trauma to the micromovements. When there's immobilization, punctures, or cuts, which are surgery, they impair key characteristics of micromovements. A medical intervention or injury at a very young age is often the cause for coordination challenges and sensory processing issues. Because these medical procedures are life-saving for newborns, lost in the crisis is a recognition that the micromovements used for their development just got sidetracked. Some of the most common developmental hijacks we find are from immobilization with monitoring and IVs with the premature baby, the immobilization and incisions from a heart or a hernia surgery, and the trauma from a lumbar puncture used to make sure there's no meningitis that's the cause for a high fever. Even though it may be years later, the micromovements affected by medical procedures are generally sources of great opportunity. The third micromovement disruptor is birth. So what about birth? Our little bodies go through a lot of stress with birth, and they need to in order to kick off so many vital systems. What traditionally defines a good birth? Well, most fundamentally, mom and baby are alive, and there's a good APGAR score. What an APGAR score doesn't tell us is how well the micromovements survive the birth process. And it's these micromovements that will end up supporting the self-regulation, sleeping, eating, and pooping that we associate with having a good baby. So what can happen at birth to throw off micromovements? Well, actually, there's so many things. Births can be really fast or really slow. They can be paused or forced along. And each of these impacts the micromovements in unique ways. And that's just a regular delivery. Did you realize that 1 out of every 3 of us came into this world via C-section? About 35%. And even though so many babies are born this way, doesn't mean it's a normal delivery, nor is it gentle to baby or mom. Often the C-section is an urgent situation calling for a quick rescue to a stressed baby. An arm is a handle, maybe a swipe under the belly to yank the baby out. Everyone's alive, but that alters the well-tuned micromovements. So again, everyone's alive, APGAR scores are good, health is good. Developmentally, the micromovement foundation is usually compromised. And what happens at birth sets the stage for behavior and coordination. The fourth area is prenatal development. And I know this is the hardest to wrap your head around, but it's actually the most significant. This is the period the micromovements first develop. If your child struggles with so much for no apparent reason, this is the time period we suspect. It's truly like the pieces haven't really been put together yet. So let's dive in a little more. There are years of ultrasound studies showing that in pregnancy, movement occurs in very systematic and discrete phases, building in complexity as the weeks go by. You know this. You felt the movements change month by month during pregnancy. And when we match up a struggling child's actual movement patterns, they correlate to ways that prenatal development may have been limited or skewed. So how would that happen? Well, some of the usual suspects are being breech, which is an unusual orientation, developing when mom has preeclampsia or placenta previa, because the stress limits movement. An umbilical cord issue can cause stress and skewed movement, and being a multiple can also skew and restrict movement, and it's different depending if you're the top or bottom baby. Well, using the bridging technique, the affected micromovements are pretty easily identified and then guided back to working better. Children grow into better movement relationships, which results in calmer behavior and improved coordination. From a practical perspective, bridging technique rebuilds all of the micromovements from the bottom up, so at any age, the effect of these prenatal stressors can begin to be erased. It just takes longer the older you are. Your head is swimming, so let's do a quick recap. It's not a nature versus nurture issue, and it's not a mind over matter issue. Sometimes the structure of ourselves just isn't able to function right. It's all about the building code blocks of micromovements. They are originally programmed before we are born, And when these micro movements don't work, there are behavioral, self-regulation, balance, and ease of activity challenges, and often pain. And there's 4 reasons that these micro movements can be thrown off: injuries and accidents, medical procedures, birth, and prenatal stress. Most importantly, the bridging technique provides the roadmap to rebuild the essential micro-movement foundation quickly and easily using gentle, non-invasive movements. Movement to reorganize movement? Yes. So we may not have come into this world dealt the best hand of cards, but from a movement perspective, the game is far from over. Micro-movements change, and so can you and your child.